You are looking at production chain for 22.5 heavy modular frames per minute, and it definitely looks smaller and more efficient than every single heavy modular frame meme on r/Satisfactory. Better yet, this production chain is 100% based on singular blueprints. Final heavy modular frame factory is built from 8 blueprints stacked together, and the smaller satellite factories are also one singular blueprint just being mirrored. Compared to standard recipes, this layout is using half the energy. This layout saves around 4k iron and 1k coal, and the building time savings are just enormous. The whole compound was constructed in under 2 hours, and majority of this time was dragging raw resources onto the site. In previous video, I have explored and explained first 2 factories producing 45 reinforced iron plates and 67.5 modular frames per minute. And today, I want to dive deep and explain satellite factory for 540 concrete per minute and explain in detail setup for factory producing 22.5 heavy modular frames per minute. As usual for my blueprints, everything is labeled, intake rooms are separated from factories, blueprint description have total resource input breakdown, I list alternative recipes, exterior have labels for global factory management, and there is even power approximation for production chains. Aside providing blueprints itself, I will showcase factory setups, connections, raw resource intake splits, and I would provide production schematics and discuss alternative recipes. Even if this factory is not your jam, you still can apply knowledge of this video to your own personal factories. For your own personal convenience, there are timestamps for theory and thought process behind both factories, and timestamps where I show how to set up factories and how to manage and install your blueprints outside of the game. So without further ado, let's break down alternative recipes and logistics. Here is standard recipe layout for heavy modular frames. As discussed in previous video, the most powerful recipes to compress this factory are steel screws, bolted iron plate and steel frame. In the first 2 factories, this combination allowed to drop number of screw-related constructors from 200 plus to only 4. Dropping the number of assemblers is not so significant, but it's still about 30 to 50% less machines. And this alone allowed to condense reinforced iron plates and modular frame factories down to one singular blueprint each. On the output from the first 2 factories, we have 67.5 modular frames per minute. And now, we need to convert this into heavy modular frames. And main limiting factor in size of my heavy modular frame blueprint factory is not the first 2 factories, but it is rather concrete production. Limestone is the second most abundant resource after iron, but there is always breaking point where it is just better to construct second factory on other location than to put 10 kilometers of conveyor belts with the limestone. Majority of limestone nodes on the map are normal, and around tier 4 and 5 it is very convenient to operate them with full Mark III belts, and reaching 6 normal nodes is very reasonable on Satisfactory map. Also, you can play around with pure nodes and Mark IV belts, but overclocked Mark II miner with Mark III belt is the baseline for concrete production, and here's why. 270 limestone can be fed into 6 constructors and you get 90 limestone, repeated 3 times with 3 floors, and you have 270 concrete output in your blueprint. Mirror this blueprint and you get 540 concrete on 2 Mark III belts. This is how you take 6 normal limestone nodes with total of 1620 concrete total and convert it into bases for 22.5 heavy modular frames. There's no load balancing, there's no manifolds or something, just Mark III belts into Mark III belts. Also, I find myself plopping this blueprint as standalone and just feeding 1 or 2 floors with Mark III belts. And yes, outlet room is designed in a way that every floor have separate connection for exactly this use. And there is a second notion about this concrete blueprint and why total output is divided in 2 full Mark III belts. Well, first, I cannot really fit 36 constructors into a singular blueprint. Best I can do is 32 constructors on 4 floors before any overclocking. And second elephant in the room is heavy modular frame factory itself and actually the coal intake. Even with all the efficient alloy recipes, including the iron alloy and solid steel ingot, final production step still require 800 coal, and there is no belt in the game that can support 800 coal manifold. Considering the tech level, the most reasonable thing for the heavy modular frame factory is to split this into two parts on the Mark IV belts. These dictate layout for the factory itself, so we should have factory mirrored into two parts with coal intake on the two opposite sides. This way you will be the most efficient with the blueprint and with your belts. And this works wonders with the concrete factory and two 270 belts for the concrete on the both sides. You just treat your concrete production just as the coal intake with the two Mark III belts. Obviously you cannot merge two Mark III belts into Mark IV belt, so this is a necessity on this level of technology before we go for something like Mark V belts, for example. We have arrived to this point where we have covered every single satellite factory leading to this final stage, and now it is time to explore and explain the final stage of this production chain for the heavy modular frames. First, I want to showcase the evolution of blueprints for this production chain. First idea was to split production into A and B blueprints for every single factory. But this leads to internal connections, and when you need to connect like 10 belts on 3 floors, well, this is not really playable, especially when you want to share this blueprint with someone else. After playing around with factory compression, second idea was to have one mirrored blueprint for the machines itself and another one for decorations. Honestly, not my jam, but still rather interesting idea. The first iteration of heavy modular frame factory was once again split into dual blueprint in this awesome 4-way symmetry. Nice idea, looks really dope, but I need to overclock manufacturers and I do not like internal connections. Well, unless they are very straightforward. And this was absolutely not straightforward, it was very dark inside, a lot of connections in different places, not convenient. The whole idea behind this 4-way bizarre symmetry was to avoid manifolds as much as I can, but honestly with the amount of the internal connections it was not convenient at all. So I just decided to go for the manifold, and this means that I can just totally embrace 8 blueprint setup being mirrored, and this way I can use Mark IV belt for iron, copper and modular frames that will go into the manifold circle, while coal and concrete is just being fed from the opposite sides. And then there is one particular alternative recipe that makes blueprint layout even more streamlined. I am talking about encased industrial pipe. This recipe not only limits the amount of internal manifolds from 2 to 1, but it saves like 30% coal thanks to less input of the steel ingots. Really powerful recipe with no downsides or edge cases. For the heavy modular frames itself, I am using heavy encased frame alt recipe. And while on surface this just removes screws with all those like annoying constructors, real benefit is total power consumption that drops more than 50%. And this factory is eating quite a lot of power, so this is kinda win-win. Another thing with 4 mirrored stacks that we have excess of modular frames. We are producing extra 7.5 modular frames from the previous factory. This is not only justified by other than heavy modular frame production chains, but with several other reasons. At this stage, we probably still want to farm quite a bit in ticket department, so feeding this into the awesome sink is a solid idea for tier 5 and 6. But later, we can go to 100 IQ. Every single heavy modular frame manufacturer is using exactly 7.5 modular frames. So we have exact access for 1 extra blueprint with 1 extra manufacturer. But 9 blueprints does not stack visually. What we will do? Well, in this case we can go just bigger and use 18 blueprints. 9 blueprints per site, 8 like in standard layout and 1 extra per site thanks to the modular frame excess production. Yes, you will need double the amount of satellite factories. And by the way, my blueprints can easily be modified not to be like a simple mirror, but rather like 4-way symmetry with double the production rate. Obviously, this upgrade requires slight modification for heavy modular frame blueprint itself. Mark V belts for concrete, iron and copper manifolds are heavily advised. You will need to input something about 720 iron and 720 copper for the whole thing. You will need to be clever where and how you input your coal, since it will not fit onto a single or even double Mark V belt. And you will need to get extra 135 concrete, that is like extra 9 constructors or a bit of overclocking for your concrete factories, and this is required for those extra 2 blueprints. But once again, the scale and technology level at use heavily imply that this is a late game option for the final tiers. You will not only need Mark V belts, but probably will use Mark III miners. And let's be real, producing just over 50 heavy modular frames per factory per minute is a late game thing, so a lot of theory, a lot of numbers. But I want just to show how you plop this factory in the standard configuration. And most important, how you connect everything inside and outside. This is manifold setup. There are internal connections, but they are separated from the main factory, so it is very easy to do. For every single connection, just use Mark IV belt on every single outlet. Do not forget to connect power. Do this for the both sides and then repeat this 2 extra times. Now, you need to do your external connections. To connect everything, I do prefer to use foundation or sandwich layer. Place holes on the heavily labeled side. Start with the coal connection. Connect coal on the both sides. Then place holes for the copper and iron only on the one side. For iron and copper, you can mismatch those two with the foundries. Just remember to wrap around copper and iron belts on the other sides. Then connect concrete and modular frames. I do prefer to wrap around modular frames as well. For the visuals, you can notice that manufacturer inputs are exposed, so you can see if everything works. This is not only visual flair, this is a functional feature. If you never exported blueprints, you will need to do this manually. There is no way to do this in-game at the moment. You will need to go to your system disk, users, your username, app data, local, factory game, saved, save games, blueprints. There, your session would create a folder once you have blueprints unlocked and created your first blueprint. Every blueprint consists from 2 parts: .svp file with parts and items and .svp CFG file with the text description and color settings. I tend to label inputs and outputs in my description and also to list my alternative recipes. So for the full experience, just use both files. Quick note that my blueprints are done in update 8 experimental and they will crush in all the versions of Satisfactory. I hope it will be fixed soon, but for now we are limited to use only in the latest version. Link for blueprints are down below in the pinned comment, and next time around I would explore and explain my blueprints for rotor, stator and motor production. Thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, have a nice one, and Yakez out!